As a species, what draws us to horror? What is it in our brains that force us to believe we want to be horrified? That forces us to think to ourselves, I want to be afraid. I don't know what I want to be afraid of. I just know I want to be afraid. But why is that? Why do we do this to ourselves when we find it unsettling? Why do we enjoy being horrified? When we scare one another, we feel joy out of that, but that's not what we're getting. And when we're scared by others, we don't feel joy. We feel betrayed by whoever scared us. But we still crave it. We go out on our own to find stories or movies or shows, something out there that can display a sense of terror in ourselves that we crave so desperately. We want all of it. We want it again and again and again, so much we're willing to throw out piles upon piles of cash for the smallest glimpse of a little bit of horror. But why? Why do we do that? Why do we crave being afraid? Why are we drawn to horror? Well, first let's explore a little bit about what horror is and the motions it goes through to draw emotion out of you. Well, first I would like to go over some things that should be scary to us, but aren't. Now, of course, this is subjective. I'm not saying that you weren't afraid or that anyone else wouldn't be. Simply that, subjectively, this should have been scarier than it was. Now, in this case, what I'm talking about is the Purge. Now, anyone who's ever seen the Purge understands that there is a horrifying aspect in that it kind of rings true for all of us. When we think upon the Purge, when we think about the morality and the choices made in the movies, we understand that it rings at least somewhat true. If you can let out all of your hatred, all of your emotion, all of your everything in a single night, you're going to be a bit more well-behaved later on. So why wasn't it scary? Why was it more of a jump scare nonsense mess than actual horror? Not to say that a jump scare isn't horrifying, but it's a cheap gimmick of horror that isn't necessarily scary. But why wasn't the Purge terrifying like it should have been? In my opinion, at least, it's because there was no insinuation. The intent of your antagonists was laid out on the table in front of you and just told rather than being shown. You were given the answers right away. There was no time for you to decide in your head the kind of people that might be out there, because there was only one kind of person out there. A murderous freak, someone who wanted to kill, not necessarily torture, just kill. These people do exist in our real world, and they are pretty scary. But when you're given the opportunity to write a story where everything is legal for one night a year, your creativity should spark up, and you should have more variety in the horrors that people can create. The Purge wasn't scary to me because you were given one antagonist. I mean, it was a bunch of people, but it was essentially one antagonist. So it didn't feel scary to me because there was no variety. It didn't feel lived in. The entire world felt, I don't know, like it felt like I was watching a movie, which, I mean, is understandable. I was watching a movie. But I feel as if it shouldn't have been that simple. When you're watching a movie, you want to feel immersed. But The Purge didn't do anything like that to me, because all of the antagonists were murder-hungry morons that just decided to kill because it's killing night. There was no religious intent. There was no moral intent. There was no, I get joy from watching people bleed out on the street. There was just one murder, and then another murder, and then another murder, and then another murder, and then another murder, and it just kept going. But why isn't that scary? Why can you watch a horrific moment of murder in front of your eyes over and over and over again in a movie without feeling like it's a scary moment? I think it's because the intention was just in front of you. All of it. Everything that this story has to tell you is in front of your eyes the moment the movie starts. There's no interpretation. There's nothing. But what is a scary movie could be, I don't know, simple, fun, maybe even just something small, something that has more insinuation. Take the Alien movie, for example. The first Alien movie from 1979. Still a staple on all horror films, but why was it so horrifying? Well, I believe that the reason why the Alien movie was so terrifying was because you had this entity. You didn't understand what it was or what it wanted. You understood that it killed people, but you didn't understand how. The movie didn't display how it killed anyone. The movie didn't explain why it was doing this, just that it was. But why? That was a question that, up until it was made a franchise, was just about never answered. And I love that. I loved that this entity, this animal, was just that. It was an animal. But it didn't need to be explained, because it was an animal. The insinuation that it could be around any corner because it's an animal. The insinuation that it's doing this because it's an animal. The insinuation that it's incredibly intelligent and using hit-and-run tactics because it can be hurt changes the emotions you feel when the characters come across it, knowing that they could change the tides at any moment to hurt this entity that's running away from them, and using hit-and-run tactics to pick them off so that they are less of a threat. It creates tension. You know that at any moment, something could change the tide of battle. And at every moment, something does. A person dies, or a new discovery is made, and the alien creature is made more horrified by the answers that come up and by the new questions that take their place. But why? Why do we crave that feeling? There are many of us who crave the idea of being terrified, but don't quite understand what being terrified should feel like. I'm looking at you, directors of movies. But if you've ever been a child, if you've ever had friends or family who tell you scary stories, you've probably heard the story about the girl with the dog under her bed who wishes to feel safe by allowing her dog to lick her hand to know that she is safe in her room. It's a simple story. It's one that just about everyone on Earth has heard. And it's terrifying. If you haven't heard the story, allow me to explain my own abridged version of it. As I do not remember the story that well, it has to be abridged. I'm not going to Google it. Essentially, you have a little girl. She is young, she is adorable, she is a little girl. She hears a tapping. And it continues like that for as long as she can understand. And it's terrifying her. She doesn't know why she's hearing it. She doesn't know if it's a leak or a horrifying monster that's just beyond her door. She doesn't know what it is. It's her imagination. What's making the sound? I have zero idea. She has a dog under her bed. Her little puppy that licks her hand and does not growl, does not make any sounds. At least, not when she is safe. When there is no intruder in the house. When nothing is to be feared. When nothing is wrong. She hears the tapping again. It just continues as the night goes on. She puts her hand under her bed, and her dog licks her hand. The dog does not growl. The dog does not spring into action. He licks her hand. Nothing is happening. Nothing is wrong. She puts her hand under the bed again, and she is licked. Nothing is wrong. Nothing is happening. Nothing is happening. You have nothing to be afraid of. The knocking drives her wild. She doesn't know what she's supposed to be afraid of, but something is happening. But she puts her hand under her bed again, and for a third time, her dog licks her hand. This time the knocking drives her crazy. She has to see for her own eyes, for her own mind, what is making that sound. She has to know something is making the sound for a good reason. Something that makes sense. Something that is definitely not scary. Something is simply making a tapping sound for a reason that can be explained, and nothing is wrong. She makes her way out of bed, out of her room, and follows the tapping. She follows it down the stairs, down the hall, past the kitchen, to the bathroom. At this point, she's resigned in the knowledge that she definitely knows what the sound is. Must just be the shower. After all, the shower drips quite a bit after it's used. And sometimes the shower will keep dripping for hours on end afterwards. and her terrified young mind has simply picked up the tapping and convinced her that something is wrong. Because that's what your mind does when you're close to sleep and your imagination takes hold. The dripping continues, and she decides that if it's simply a leak, she'll take a look, she'll make sure that the faucets are turned off so that no water is being wasted, and she'll go back to bed. She opens the door slowly, because in her mind, she feels that something could be wrong. What if it's an intruder trying to lead me in here? What if something's wrong? What if there's a monster behind the door tapping just to lead me into here? What's making that sound? She's unsure, and that's why she opens the door. Because she must know to put her mind at ease. She must know what's making that sound. She opens the door, and it cracks open. And she stands there, horrified. For in front of her eyes is her dog. The puppy she keeps under her bed for times of fear. And its blood is dripping. There's no footprints to be found. She didn't hear any commotion. She can't believe what her eyes are seeing, what her nose is smelling. Her heartbeat rises in her ears. She can hear nothing but her heart. Even the dripping has ceased. As the slow realization that something is under her bed. Why does that story terrify us? When a movie can display gore and pain and carnage, but we feel nothing from that. Why is that? Well, I believe it's the insinuation versus the expectation. When you're told the answer, you know what to expect. But when you're given an insinuation, you have an expectation, but whether or not it'll be satisfied or whether or not the expectation is how things are going to go, it's unsettling to you. And it builds tension because of that. The dark somnium works in a lot of ways like that. A YouTube channel here on this platform known as the Dark Somnium. And I love that channel. Apart from that, Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. The Black Fog, narrated by Jeff Clement. Jeff is an amazing narrator. I love the voice. I love how serious he seems to take his work. There's a lot of tension in that story. And that makes it horrifying. Because less is more. If you give us the answers, we'll know what to expect, and there won't be as much tension. But when a monster or a person is coming to you, and you don't know their intentions, and you don't know what they need from you or what they want from you, you don't know how they would hurt you, but you do know that they want to hurt you, that creates tension. And that's terrifying. So why are we drawn to horror? I would argue that we're drawn to emotion. In the modern age, things are given to us. Things mean almost nothing. And our emotions aren't stretched out as much. No longer do you have to be afraid of small things, because we've shown that we're much stronger than they are. No longer do you have to be afraid of the dark, because we have lights that can illuminate it. We don't fear it, because we know what the threat is and how it would come for us. But horror is knowing that something could be behind you at any moment without knowing what it is or what it wants. And that's what we look for in horror. We want to feel someone breathing down our neck. We want to feel as a prey hunted by a predator, because we don't want to be in control anymore, because we don't want to be the choice makers of our own destiny. We want someone else to choose. We want to give up, let someone else take the wheel for a moment. We want to be afraid, and we want to be controlled, because we want to make decisions and say it was because we were afraid that we made those decisions. We want to get back in touch with the most basic of instincts, because we feel that we have to have them to survive, and we aren't getting them anymore.